Okay, we are looking at variables. A variable is a factor that can change in an experiment. An example, and these examples refer back to the textbook when you were reading about variables. They were talking about an experiment that they were doing with hummingbirds, and they were changing the color of the feeder to see if it made a difference. Okay, so some variables that could change in that experiment would be the type of food, the shape of the feeder, the size of the feeder, and the time of day. Those would be examples of variables those are things that could change within the experiments. An independent variable is a variable that you purposely change to test your hypothesis. Okay, an independent variable is the variable I change. Remember that statement. I change because independent starts with I, and you're thinking that it's the one I change. That'll help you remember how to identify the independent variable. So in the example from the textbook, we're dealing with that hummingbird experiment, the variable that they changed on purpose was the color of the feeder. They kept everything else the same. Same type of food, same feeder, and the same time of day. So the only thing that they changed was the color of the feeder. One was red and one was yellow. The dependent variable is the factor that may change in response to the independent variable. Okay? Remember, the dependent variable is the factor you're measuring. Okay? From the experiment in the book on hummingbirds, the dependent variable was the number of times the hummingbirds visited each feeder. Okay, that's what they were counting. They were counting how many times the hummingbirds came to feeder, the red feeder and the yellow feeder, over a period of 3 days. A good experiment is a controlled experiment, meaning that it has only one variable that's changed at a time. So you only have one thing that's changed. That way you know that your results are occurring because of that change. You cannot go change multiple things. So if we're going back to the hummingbird experiment, they changed the color of the feeder and that was all. Had they changed the color and the food type, then they're adding in another variable. So you don't know, maybe the hummingbirds are visiting the red feeder more often because they like the food that's in the red feeder better. Okay? They don't know that for sure when you start changing things or changing more things than one. So a controlled experiment is one that you only have one variable that is changed at a time. When you collect data during an experiment, you will have to graph your results. To graph independent and dependent variables, I want you to remember the statement dry mix. The D stands for dependent, which is the responding variable, the one you're changing. I'm sorry, the one you're measuring. And then Y, axis, is where you will put it on the graph. This is the Y-axis. Mix, the M stands for manipulated, the one I change, which is your independent variable. And X-axis goes on the bottom. Okay, so this is where your data will be located. The dependent variable, or the measured variable, is going to go on the y-axis, and the independent variable goes on the y-axis, x-axis. The independent variable goes on the x-axis. Okay, those would be like your categories. And here I set up one about the hummingbirds. Okay, and I have a key over here. You can see the red feeder is the one with the lines through the bar, and the yellow feeder is a solid bar. Okay, the number of hits per day. The number of visits was our dependent variable. That's what they were measuring. How many times hummingbirds came to those feeders for day 1, 2, and 3. The independent variable was the color. Okay, the feeder color, and that's what we're showing here. Yes, I have days across the bottom, but really it's showing us the red versus the yellow. Okay, red versus yellow, red versus yellow. Okay, across the bottom. Okay, make sure that you fill in those notes on your paper and then glue them into your notebook, your ISN, and Make sure that you show them to me when you have completed them. And please come to me with any questions.